Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
For 6 years, Theresa May has been quietly sitting in the cabinet. She's avoided the plotting, mostly, and has presumably been making private judgments about all her colleagues in government. Today, she's had the chance to form a government of her own, and her colleagues at last find out what she's been thinking about them. Bad news for some, as they were dropped. There were some big-name sackings. Good news for others, fresh faces given a big hoist up to top jobs. It nets out as a hugely different government. We've become used to remarkably few personnel changes over the last 6 years, so this is a shock to the Westminster system and a bigger change than last year when the coalition ended and the Lib Dems dropped out of power. So what does it all mean? Well, our political editor Nick Watt is with me. And Nick, before we go into what it all means, just this extraordinary story tonight that you've managed to get hold of, about Theresa May and George Osborne.
Yes, well, Downing Street were pretty clear yesterday that Theresa May had sacked George Osborne. He did not resign. And what I've learnt tonight is that they had a very frosty meeting in Downing Street yesterday in which Theresa May made some rather pointed remarks to the outgoing Chancellor. She said that he had overpromised and underdelivered, and she took issue with his surplus target, said that's given them a nightmare. He could never deliver it. It was perhaps, some people said, a bit of a stunt to catch the Labour Party. Now, I understand that Theresa May was repeating really what she'd said in a speech in Birmingham the day before, where she had reiterated her pledge to bin the surplus target, and also she said that George Osborne had not done enough to champion deep economic reform, and she was going to do that. Now, the reverberations from these sackings and these appointments are still sort of rebounding around Westminster, so we thought we would take a look at how the new Prime Minister has gone about forming her government. Not since Harold Macmillan's Night of the Long Knives in 1962 have we seen so much ministerial blood flow along Downing Street. Theresa May has reordered an entire government as she responds to the twin instructions from the electorate: take Britain out of the EU and change the ways of the governing elite. As you waded through the blood, it was clear that the new Prime Minister had three aims in mind. Number one, deliver Brexit with a Nixon in China approach. Theresa May's appointment of a trio of Brexiteers to take charge of Britain's exit from the EU fulfills her pledge to ensure that the referendum winners run this process. Allies who say that only arch Eurosceptics have a hope of success are drawing parallels with the way in which the hardline Richard Nixon delivered a breakthrough in US relations with China. The Prime Minister might also be trying to create some space should the negotiations turn out to be slightly more challenging.
What the Prime Minister has done is said, right, OK, you've done all the heavy lifting intellectually about this, deliver it for me in government. And I think that because they are trusted, deeply trusted by all Conservatives, both here in Parliament and in the grassroots, to be true to their beliefs on that they're actually in the best place to make the deals and perhaps the slight compromises that you have to do to deliver Brexit and deliver it for the benefit of the British people.
Number two, rewiring of Whitehall. Not since the era of Tony Blair, who loved to abolish and set up government departments, have we seen such upheaval here in Whitehall. For example, the Business, Innovations and Skills Department is renamed, and its HQ houses some of the newbies. There is pain and delight in equal measure as the very un-Thatcherite industrial strategy makes a return, and climate change is nowhere to be seen on the nameplate. Number three, social reform in the spirit of Jo Chamberlain. In her first statement outside Number 10, the new Prime Minister delivered an unmistakable message of change by making clear that she would tackle burning injustices. This thinking owes much to her new Joint Chief of Staff, Nick Timothy, who is the biographer of the great social reformer, Joseph Chamberlain.
Yeah, being from Stratford-on-Avon, close to Birmingham, with Joseph Chamberlain and, of course, his sons as well, I think that is something that of a role model to us all. That the ability to devolve power, but also to champion our cities and be a real champion for those on national living wage, those hard-working families that I think she keeps sort of going back to.
Theresa May will finalise her new government over the coming days as she turns to the lower ministerial ranks. The bloodletting is not yet over.
Nick, what there? Now, look, before we digest all that, Chris is here with one small legacy matter of David Cameron's era. It is a letter from the PM's office released on the web. It's all about the severance pay of special advisors. It's a bit different to everything we've been talking about, but Chris, explain this to us.
Well, so there's a process in Whitehall called ministerial direction. When civil servants think they're being asked to do something that they shouldn't be doing, for value for money grounds usually, they will say to a minister, we'll do this, but you have to put in writing that you've asked us to do it. David Cameron has asked the Cabinet Office to pay extra severance pay to his own special advisors because he feels very sorry that they've lost their jobs in a sudden shock over the last month. So we don't really know how this is going to be distributed, but it's going to be special advisors who otherwise would have got around £750,000 in total. And,
that's about 10 of them, rather
yeah,
than
well, about
not
15,
one
we think,
person.
yeah. And now going to get about £1 million.
Right.
So it's distributed unevenly. We think it's 5-figure sums for some and 4 figures for others. It's months of pay is the issue.
So they were going to get a few months, and he wants them to get a few extra months.
Exactly.
because it's all been a bit of a rush.
Exactly. And if you're a civil servant who's perhaps seen the civil service redundancy scheme trimmed down and been made redundant, and then watched the Prime Minister say, that's very unfair that what these chaps I know are getting, and intervene personally, this might rankle a little.
Chris, thank you. Well, that's the old government's last gesture. What of the new? What kind of government have we got? With me now, Jill Rutter from the Institute for Government, Philippa Stroud, a former Conservative advisor who now sits in the House of Lords, and Phil Collins, who writes for The Times. Look, so much to talk about, if you're not too depressed by listening to Chris's previous piece. Let's just start on Whitehall. Jill, how big a radical reform, how big a reform of Whitehall have we seen?
I think we're just digesting it now. So there are two things that have sort of been forced on Theresa May by Brexit. One is she always said she was going to have a Secretary of State for Brexit. She's created that. She seems to have gone for the option of creating a new Brexit ministry. If I'd been Cabinet Secretary, I'm not sure I'd have advised her to do that straight away, but she seems to have gone for that. She's beefing up international trade with this new department with Liam Fox. But we always had a rather odd thing, which was a non-ministerial department doing trade, which actually had a minister. So that may just be a sort of growth of that with some people moving into that. But she's done something she didn't have to do. She's created this new business, energy and industrial strategy department, and in doing so abolished DEC, which of course was created by Gordon Brown for Ed Miliband in 2008. And she's also sort of moved skills, which is one of the footballs of Whitehall, back to education and given it universities too.
Does this distract people? I mean, is it now that they're going to spend 6 months thinking about where their desk is rather than getting on, or can that all just be done very smoothly?
The departments that are affected will be distracted. I mean, you know, it takes some time to get going when you do things, and you've got all those bread and butter issues like where are you going to base people, what are you going to pay them, things like that to sort out. So generally, our advice has always been to think very carefully before you do machinery of government changes, and generally don't do them. There's usually a better option.
Think carefully, step away.
David Cameron took that advice. That was one of the great things about David Cameron's administration. So you really only want to do it if you think there's a real long-term benefit to doing it.
Brexit does demand, or potentially demands that. Phil Collins, how impressed are you by the ability, if you like, of the new team to carry through what Theresa May's objectives?
Well, on the threshold of Downing Street, Theresa May gave what I thought was a really impressive speech, which was full of huge ambitions for improving the life chances of the least well-off. And that is incredibly difficult to do. Let's pretend you weren't having to extricate Britain from the European Union at the same time. The ambitions she set out there are immense. And I worry about the Cabinet in two ways. One is there's 22 people in the Cabinet. It's got a slight second and third 11 feel about it. And the other thing, which is linked to that, is if you take out two big reformers like George Osborne, for good or ill, he did some big things, pension liberalisation, Northern Powerhouse, living wage, and Michael Gove, who both education and then in the early days justice on prisons, have got real energy and passion for reform. I wonder whether that energy will exist in the existing Cabinet.
Right. Are you worried about that, Philippa, or are you
I think Michael is a huge loss to the government personally, so I'd have loved to have seen him have a place. But actually, I really like what she's done with the Department of Education, adding in universities, but also skills and apprenticeships, and giving it to someone like Justine Greening, who's deeply committed to social mobility. I mean, I've talked with Justine over this one numerous times. She really, her own story.
Strong? Do you think she's going to be strong? She's going to beat up the people she needs to beat up and be nice to the ones she needs to be nice to?
She won't beat up people, but she's focused. Social mobility is what she wants to do. It's what she's actually wanted to do for the last few years. So she's come into this department really well thought through, and she has literally from cradle all the way up through university and onto the skills agenda and the apprenticeship agenda. Now that's a social reformer's dream package, in all honesty. You know, if we wanted the skills agenda at the DWP to go with employment, but for her to have it there as well, I think is fantastic.
I mean, all that's good, and I don't doubt the fine intentions, but it's actually incredibly hard to do. It's very hard to do in a time of plenty. During the Blair government, it was found very difficult to make any progress on this, and there was plenty of money sloshing around. When you've got very little money, it's even more difficult. So it's going to be very hard. The hostages to fortune in that Theresa May speech are huge. And of course, you've got the question of European Union, which I think she's been quite clever, because she said to Boris Johnson,
put them over there,
you Brexit,
you fix absolutely.
Exactly.
She's put them over
go
there.
to your bedroom and tidy it up.
Jill, do you think a government can do more than one thing at once? Because this is quite a big thing, right? Leaving the European Union. Can it deliver this whole reform agenda, industrial strategy, equality, corporate governance, all of that, and leave the European Union? Or can a government only chew gum or walk? It can't do both at the same time.
Governments do lots of things. I mean, governments don't just do one thing. They get on doing loads and loads of things, lots of business as usual as well as reform. I think the really key sort of constraint is the political capital that the Prime Minister has to deploy. And one of the questions is, how much is she going to have to deploy sorting out Europe? Lots of this will be done at head of government level. Final deals are only ever done at head of government level. It's good she's got someone to do the heavy lifting. She has to depend that David Davis will do the heavy lifting in the way she wants it done. That's absolutely critical, that he can bang heads together. Then she'll have to decide how she is actually going to make progress on her other priorities. Is she going to put people, big hitters in number 10 to help her out, to make sure Secretary of State do what she wants? Has she actually put the people in who she knows shares her agenda, so she actually doesn't have to do so much? So I think that's really where you see the sort of bandwidth now.
And I think with that number,
worried that you're not going to get it all done. Well, I mean, it's just a lot of stuff.
I mean, hang on, just one moment. That comment about number 10 and the big hitters, I think that's really important. One of the things she has done is pretty much cleared out number 10 of all of its special advisors, hence Chris's comments about special advisors leaving.
Always a terrible mistake to do that.
But
all that folk memory, all those people who know what you're doing.
What it does give her an opportunity to do is bring in people who are really aligned with her agenda and genuinely want to land some of the reform.
Yeah, and they'll take a year learning how to do it.
Well, and you ask me, am I worried? As I said, I'm really pleased about Justine. I'm really pleased about Sajid going in at DCLG, really focused on building houses. That is one of the things we absolutely need. And I think it's Liz Truss's appointment at Ministry of Justice is interesting too. Michael was very focused on the academisation of prisons, and you have someone who's actually got a strong education background. If she chooses to, she could come in and implement the Dame Sally Coates review.
Isn't the usual rule that if you want to do lots of stuff on the domestic social agenda, you need money? And the one thing she's not going to have, surely, Phil, is oodles of money.
They haven't got loads of money, but that's not to say you can't do things. I mean, lots of the prison reforms don't need a lot of money. So if Liz Truss does pick up the baton from Michael Gove, which she might, she's a reformer herself, then there are things that can be done, and there are plans there. There's a lot in welfare that can be done that actually can save money if you're good at it as well. So you can't use money as an excuse because you haven't got any. But it does worry me, because I think leaving the European Union is several things at once. I think that is not just one thing. I think that's lots of things. And if the government can do that in the next few years before the election and nothing else, it will already have been quite successful. So I'm not sure it can even manage that, let alone all these other things.
I mean, it partly depends on her style of government as well, which we don't know yet. So David Cameron was always very good at almost being a chairman and letting his Secretary of State get on and really
she's a
run
micromanager, they said. At the
well, if she can achieve that chairmanship role and really work with her Secretary of State, then she has the opportunity for social reform.
I was just going to say that one of the things that she doesn't have so many of is civil servants. I mean, some people may think that helps everything run much more smoothly, but Brexit is going to absorb an enormous amount of civil service time and effort, just mapping where Europe matters to us. We've been there for 40 years. It's a really, really big exercise. And quite a lot of these other reforms require civil servants to do them. If the brightest and the best are all being creamed into the Brexit ministry, then it's going to actually reduce the capacity in quite a lot of other places. So it'd be really interesting to see whether she goes slow on the pace of cuts to civil service.
Thank you all very much indeed. Let's hope she's not watching and getting depressed about the job she's got.